Welcome back to Purpenthicity, a podcast focused on purpose identification and living within the essence of your authenticity. We are so excited for this week's episode. We're joined by Tej Singh, who shares his unique journey on how he found himself, his purpose, and ultimately inner peace. We think this is such a great interview because everyone can draw something from it in terms of navigating life's journey and ultimately discovering who you are and what type of impact and meaning that you want to foster and facilitate within the world. So tune in and enjoy the show.
Cool. Welcome back, everybody. We are here today, Austin and myself, with Tej, a senior account executive at a global technology firm, host of the Growth Lab podcast, a pursuer of inner peace and self-discovery. So Tej, thanks so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Austin, for having me.
Absolutely. Tej, why don't we get started? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. I was saying this to Austin earlier. That question is so broad, so I've got to really figure out what to share with you guys. But I'm sure that will come up in the episode itself. But a little bit about myself, as Derek said. I'm a senior account executive. Have been in sales for the past few years at a global consulting company. Also, a big component of who I am is being on the path to self-discovery. And that's a big umbrella and it's a broad statement, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But that's been a really important part of who I am and my journey, is to really live from an authentic place in myself, find that place first of all, and then live from it. So that's a big component of who I am. I've lived in a bunch of different places. I was born in India. I grew up in California. I've lived in Alabama for a couple of years. I've lived in Florida for a few years, went to college in Florida. I moved to San Diego for a few years. Now I'm in Indiana right now. So I've been all over the place, but that's been a big component of who I am too, because I've really learned to adapt and really understand who I am while my environment was changing so much. And that's just a starting point. I'll leave it at that for now. Otherwise, I can go down a rabbit hole.
That's a big starting point.
Yeah. I think that's a fascinating place to start. Even just identifying yourself as someone who is very invested in self-discovery. As I recall, the first time that I met you, Tej, you went by TJ, and I just think that's a fascinating element now. We were colleagues at this global consulting firm, and I was always drawn to you based off of the professionalism that you had. I remember I actually shadowed when I first started at the company. You were already a superstar there, and I shadowed on one of your first calls, and I just remember after leaving you, like, this guy knows his stuff, and I had no doubt that you were going to be wildly successful. And then as we were kind of talking from a pre-planning standpoint, understanding that maybe that success on the external maybe didn't necessarily translate to the peace and the fulfillment that you were looking for inside. So I'd be curious just to know a little bit more of, I guess, one, can you talk a little about the transformation from TJ to Tej? And I think that will probably emulate from, how the internal piece to how that reflects to you externally.
Yeah. That's a great point. And it's a story that not a lot of people know, because either people know me by TJ or they know me by Tej, right? They know this identity in the past, or they know this identity of who I've become. And some people in the middle, they've seen both sides. But essentially, man, how I would describe it is, when I was in college, even growing up, I went by TJ. When I moved here from India, a part of me wanted to conform and be like everyone else. So having the name Tej was okay, TJ would go, it would be easy for people to pronounce, and I would kind of get along with people. So it was kind of like a conforming in some way, and it happened at a young age, and never thought too much about it. It was just I'm TJ, and I just went by that. And then, throughout college, I was TJ, and the name itself doesn't hold that much, importance. It's more of what that means behind it, right? So when I was, I graduated college, I went into this company, I started there. And, after you graduate college, a lot of what you're trying to do is really prove yourself, right? Because you've been sold this script, right? And I did successfully in college. I had, I had all the accolades in college I can get. I was part of the professional selling program. It was a unique program that you had to apply to. So I did all the right things, right? And then I got into this company, and then I was like, okay, what do I need to do next? You have to be successful. You got to make money. You have to make six figures. All right, I'll do that. So then I did that for the first year. I did it for the second year, and I got the accolades that I needed. And I put so much weight on the next thing always. So the next thing for me after being I was in Fort Myers at the time in Florida, the next thing from there was moving back to California. That's where I grew up. So moving back to California, what it required within this company is you had to, make your numbers and really be successful to get this promotion. So I put a lot of weight on that, and my identity formed into being this individual that was working in this company and looking for this promotion and to go back to California. Everything revolved around this for 2 years. So all the personal growth stuff I did was to go to that, right? It was to promote that to happen. And then it happened. It was 2 years and then it happened, right? So I moved to SF. I get this promotion. I have made six figures. So all of this is pretty. And this story probably sounds familiar.
Oh yeah, you're talking to my soul right now.
Yeah. This sounds very familiar. It's so funny. It's so funny too because as you guys stated, I do a podcast and I've been bringing a lot of people I've met in my journey, and as I speak to them, it's so funny how similar stories are. Right, we all go through this hero's journey, different circumstances, but at the same time, we all go through this crisis where we've run the script and then something happens, right? So going back to the story, now I moved to SF. I'm in SF and I start this job. And then part of moving into SF, I had there's a trip to go to Rome, Italy. I had one, so I did that trip and I took my mom to that, and it was amazing. And I was on a high, and then I came back. And then all the dust settled, right? Like now I'm back to the grind, and then I'm back into this job, and I'm like, and then I probably like 2 weeks, a month into it, it seemed very similar. Like there was no differences. I had glamorized being in Silicon Valley. Like it was just going to be this amazing thing. I'm going to be talking to Silicon Valley CEOs and CMOs. It's going to be just the best thing ever. But it was just all right. Like it was cool. Like, yeah, but it wasn't like, anything mind blowing. But I think I had put so much expectations. Like my expectation and my vision of what it would be like was way beyond what it actually was. Right. So that's when I kind of got into identity crisis. Right. And another thing about being in Silicon Valley is everyone is working for a tech company. You get into an Uber, somebody's working in Google or somebody's working in Facebook. Nobody cares what company you work for. But like where I was in the place prior in Florida and Fort Myers, being in this small town, everyone was working at this company. So the performance that you had at work was how people looked at you, right? Austin, you said it yourself, like you saw me as someone that was successful at the company, right? And wait on me just because you knew I was successful, right? That just happens very unconsciously. But when you go to SF, everyone's working there. So I had a bit of identity crisis where I was like, who am I? Am I this person that works at this company, or am I more than that? And I didn't know that. I did because it was weighted so much at work. Life works in an interesting way. I came off of killer performances. And then right as I started work, I took like 2 big hits without even being involved. Right. So that was a slap in my face right away. It's like, all right, are you going to wake up now? I'm like, shit. So then, I was like, I need help. Right. Like I need help. And I'll tell you, Austin, Derek, like, for the probably like 3, 4, 5 months, like I went through depression. Like I was in a really bad state. I don't know if I would, medically categorize it as that, but I was just in a bad, shitty situation because outside looking in, my family included, my friends included, they're like, you got this awesome promotion that you've been talking about for the last 2 years, right? So you got that thing that you're looking for. And I almost felt like guilty, or I felt bad about sharing that I didn't feel fulfilled, or I felt bad about being in this position. And it was like a day over day over. And the other thing was I was working remotely now, because when you're in this outside position, you're not really seeing your, coworkers, and you're just working remotely mostly. You see your coworkers maybe once a month. so that was another thing. I kind of got into this pit of being at home all the time and also feeling really shitty, while I felt caged to the point that I couldn't express how I was feeling to the outside world, even my family, because I'm like, what are they going to think? Like, I just got what I wanted. Right. So it was a bad position. And then, life presented me with this, this coaching program, or this mastermind, that was based out of San Francisco. And it was a mastermind for sales professionals. But it wasn't about sales. It was the top performing salespeople in a bunch of different companies. There was the number one salesperson in Salesforce that year. There was people from, you can think about all the big tech companies, right? And they had the top performance, but they're all there for the same reason. They were there because they said, we're at the top of the pinnacle, but we're not fulfilled. Like, what is it that's missing, right? And that was the mastermind, and that was a whole year from our friends. Like, how do I show up for all these different elements that hadn't really, really hadn't put so much weight on? And that's where that transformation really started to happen. And then there came a point, and I'll stop, when I said, I'm going to have an external spell to announce to the world that I'm now Tej, that I've changed, and to myself too, right? And I had some habits that I wanted to leave behind, and that TJ, to reclaiming my name Tej, was becoming more of who I am and who I've always been, right? Rather than conforming to what society believed that I was, or who I was.
Yeah, let's take a pause there. And that was just so powerful, just sitting on the other side of that, Tej, which was one of the reasons why we were so excited for you to share your story. Personally, I mean, what your story resonates very strongly with my own. So maybe that's why I'm a little additionally fired up on that. But you talked about a couple things that I think Derek, we could both explore here. But I mean, the big thing I think that resonated for me in that is that you'd built this life, it seems like, based off of like outside expectations, or of like what you were supposed to do, versus like what you actually wanted, or what was going to be fulfilling to you. And I think just the realization of that is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Derek, I mean, I have a few different thoughts here, so I didn't want to take it over here. I saw you feverishly typing.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything? Okay,
well, no,
okay.
I was writing emails. No, I'm, just I'm kidding.
Yeah.
No, I mean, dude, honestly, Tej, it's like you just defined, I think, even the way this podcast started for me in Austin was like a similar kind of emotional and spiritual journey that Austin and I kind of both came together on randomly, and determined that we were both going down that same path of like, what in the hell are we doing? Like, what is this that we do? And I think that it was a culmination of probably like a several months of journey for each of us. And it was like kismet the way we ended up talking to each other about it. But I think I resonate so strongly with what you're saying, man, because like I was someone, and still a little bit am trying to break away from that person that identifies me with my work. And that's not healthy, because work is work. Like I do that for everything else I have, right? My family and my personal life. And if I get so bogged down in the definition of like, oh, I had a bad month, now I'm a shitty human. Now that messes with me mentally. Like everything you said resonated strong with me. And like I've had my own bouts of like, again, like, I don't know, medical diagnosis, but like just sadness and anxiety and depression. But where I find myself on the journey now is similar to you, Tej, where it's like I feel more centered over this last year, where I'm kind of like taking those tethers off of me, and they've got grips, man. Like I'm finding things stuck to me that I didn't even know were there. But it's like I feel like I'm freeing myself of that bind to professional definition of who Derek is. And I find myself speaking more freely, find myself being more authentic and raw. And like truly when I communicate, it's like, I don't give a shit if you don't like me, because this is who I am. And I want to be surrounded by people that appreciate that.
Oh, wow.
So I think that that's almost like TJ to Tej. It's like, if you don't like my new name and my new identity, well then fuck you. A little bit, like, you know? That was me getting that off my chest, Austin. But if you have a few questions, man, like, please.
I was just going to say really quickly to that point, and then Austin, I'll pass it back. It's hard, man. It's hard to the grips piece. I was laughing there because, I remember, and still to date, right? It's subtle in many ways, those layers and that hold of societal constructs that you kind of hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very subtle, kind of peeling back the onion. It takes a while. Sorry, Austin, I'll pass it back.
Yeah, and no, this is excellent. So what also jumped out to me into your share was also the expression that I found myself that I was kind of depressed. I don't know if it was like medically diagnosed, but I could sense that there was something that was weighing heavy on me. So, and then you said that you kind of found this master class. So I'm curious as you were feeling kind of quote unquote like in this dark place, what are some of the, I guess, methods or tactics that you use to try and navigate that or express yourself or to find your way out of the light? Or was it literally just this masterclass that presented this whole new way of being, so to speak?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. So like we often things, or I often thought as well, like that we control life in many ways, that we are the controller of everything. We are to a big extent, but sometimes like you just kind of hold back and something just happens, right? Like especially when you really need it. And this mastermind group was the initiation of a lot of this, right? So one of my good friends, he was actually part of this group, mastermind too. His name is Danilo, and he was a part of this mastermind for a year, and then he recommended me, and I had this conversation right around the time when I was in the lowest point. And I had the conversation, and a lot of times when you're a type A personality or a salesperson, you're like, I got this. Like, I know, like, especially if you're coming off of like a really good year, you're like, I don't need help. Like, what are you talking about? So I'm good. So I had this conversation with this guy, and he like started asking me these like really deep questions, like, hey, like, how do you feel about life? And I didn't have answers to any of them, like, because I was so superficial and so on the surface that I couldn't go there with him. And I was just like brushing it off. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't need the help. Like, I'm good in sales, man. Like, I don't know why you're reaching out to me. You're charging me this crazy amount of money to go to this weekend. Like, hell no. And to that point, I had never really spent that much money on myself. Like, I had expended money on like going to Miami, going to like different places and spending a lot of money on just like partying on the weekends. And that held weight for me. But like investing myself for a weekend was like a afterthought. Right. And I think, somehow that guy convinced me to go, right? And I think he just like, probably looking back now, he just probably like really boosted my ego and made me feel good. And it's like, hey, like he probably like did that. I don't remember the conversation exactly, but I did go, and that was the initiation. So I don't think it was just the mastermind, but the act of spending money on myself. Like it was, I don't know, it was like $2,000 or $3,000 for that weekend. It was an expensive mastermind. But the act of doing that I told myself something. I said, I'm going to invest in myself to change myself, because who I am now, it's not enough. Not enough in the sense of like, I'm just caught up in work, right? There's more to myself. So that initiated me. And like, I tell you, like after that, I kind of went a little crazy with personal growth, like for a couple of years. Like, so once that mastermind started, it was an ongoing thing. It was a subscription model, right? So you were part of that program for a year, and they had quarterly immersions, right? So like every quarter, the whole group got together, and there was weekly calls that the whole community got together, and there was a topic to be talked about, and then everyone shared. So it was like a lot of accountability in that way. And everyone was going through a similar journey. So you made crew. That's what they called a group of people. Such an important point to have people that are on a similar trajectory as you, and especially in a similar like situation to like or even a similar point in the journey, right? Like now for all three of us, we can kind of look back at that point, right? But like when you're in that point, you need someone that's already like that's there too, and you need someone that's ahead of it, but like to be able to relate, right? So the crew is so important in that way for that whole year, to be able to have those people and be able to have those discussions. But then outside of that, like that was the initiation, and I started just diving deep, man. I like did like I bought into it, I bought into the industry. So like, but it was
sounds
really
like you got a taste of it, and you were like, oh, I need more of this.
I wonder who their top salesperson is.
Yeah. It was like, it was one of those things where, and the thing is like, you got to be careful with that. I realized it afterwards. Personal growth in that industry can be a trap in itself too, right? Because in the same way that, you chase after the cars, you chase after the big house and chase after all those things, nothing wrong with that. But the usual reason for chasing after those things is because when you get there, you'll be happy. Like you
Mm-hmm.
get the feeling that you're looking for when you'll get there. So the similar trap can be there in personal growth and spiritual growth, because then you say, when I get to this state or I take X amount of courses, then I'll be happy, right? Like it's a similar trap, and it works in that way too. So, but going back to your point, Austin, like it was one of those things. Once I initiated that program, then I did a bunch of like spiritual courses and weekends, and I did a bunch of different like masterminds, also like workshops, and I did a bunch of different stuff. And by the end of it, I actually left everything and I traveled for a year, and that was also a part of it. So this was 2018, like 2017, 2018, but 2 full years of just going head in.
And I'm sure your parents were probably like, well, Tej has gone off the deep end.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
well, isn't it crazy? And I mean, all three of us probably resonate to this, is the power of like self-improvement and like investing in yourself. But I think for a large portion, I think specifically of our country, the notion of like investing in yourself is so foreign. I mean, people will spend money on trips for vacations or clothes or gadgets, but the thought of investing in your personal growth and further like learning yourself is like, oh, no, I don't know if that's worth it. I don't know if that's worth it. But I don't know. What jumped out to me in your story is that once you kind of dived into that, you found like almost this depth and well of like yourself that you kind of didn't know what was there.
Well, that industry can be like, I think from the outside in, like snake oil. It's like, you're telling me a $2,000 weekend, you're going to unlock something in me. Yeah, right. No, I'll go get the Benz. Right. So I think that's a big one. But Tej, a question for you is like, it sounds like on both of them, sales, or that professional side or that inward side, that pursuit for more can bog people down, whether it's more money, more houses, or more unlocking of who you are. And it could be a rabbit hole that you go down. What have you learned that you can implement or like teach back to people about being present and appreciating the moment that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot there. And I think the initiation of personal growth, and even if you fall into that trap, is a good trap to fall into compared to the trap like when you're initially getting into it, right? Like, because you're exposed to everything, and then you have to the biggest thing I found now that I can look back is that you got to always remember who you are and filter things through your system, right? Like a common thing that I found was like you try to replicate and become like the people that are teaching, right? So like, a famous person out there is Gary Vee, right? Like a lot of people follow him and then think they have to be exactly like him, right? And that's not going to work with everyone. Everyone can't be an animal like Gary Vee, like you just can't do it. But like take what you will and put that into the system. And if it works for you, then great, right? And in that's a started the Growth Lab, my podcast, was because I want people to take something like 1 or 2 things out of the conversations and try it themselves and see if it works, right? But I think to your point, I just wanted to comment on that of being present and like being present to what's there. I think it's like one of those things is you've got to realize when you're operating so much out of the mind that there's different bodies in ourselves, right? So if you're just operating from a mental space and you think about being present, it's probably not going to work because you're in your mind. Like if you're trying to break down being present is going to be a little more difficult. So you have to realize that we have different bodies. And what I mean by that is we have, our physical body, which is the most gross matter, right? So we can feel it, we can touch it. And after that, the closest thing that comes to it afterwards is our mental bodies, right? Like we know when our thoughts are coming into our minds, and we're there the most in our mental space. And then we have the emotional body, right? Which I think people are really numb to, especially in the corporate setting. I see this a lot where people are not really in tuned with their feelings and their emotions because you're always told to just go through logic and just like get shit done. Like you're just like breaking through that wall and getting it done, but you're not really checking in with yourself and saying, like, do I really feel good about this? Like there's not that regulation system that we're not really taught to go there. Right. And I think being present is a big component of that, right? Because you always got to have to come back to your body and say, like, where am I right now? Like, is this what I want to do and complete, like continuously come in and check in with yourself, right? So that I would say that's a big component of it. And then like if you were to go a step higher than your emotional body, I think it's kind of like, I look at it almost as a hierarchy, because the physical body and the mental body, even the emotions, are really, you can feel them in some way. Some are intangible, some are tangible. And then from there, there's this thing that's called the awareness or the intellect, not in the sense that we understand it, but in more the sense of when you're thinking your thoughts, something is observing the thoughts, right? When you're feeling your feelings, something is like you're saying my feelings. So who's the my that's feeling something, right? So like there's a place in you that's watching everything, and that's your higher intellect or higher awareness that's able to watch everything, right? And that's a great, like that's an amazing tool if you're able to find the discernment in your awareness, because whenever you're not present to a situation, you can say, am I just like in my thoughts? Am I just so mental right now? Like I'm just completely there? Or, you know, am I like, am I feeling my feelings? Am I feeling where I'm at? Or am I looking at this situation from a higher place? The situation can go on, but you can find a discernment, and that allows you to be present and not be so caught up. Right. So like, that's what I'll say. I don't know if that answers what you're looking for, Derek, but like, those are the couple of thoughts that came up. Obviously there's practices that you can do to be able to be more present in that way, but that's what comes up for me right now.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, the last thing you said like melted my brain a little bit.
Yeah.
This higher intellect, I'm like, holy shit. But I think also, you know, I think all three of us are incredibly privileged to be in the state that we're in from like a mental perspective, and whether, look at you, that was like synchronous coffee.
That
drink.
was,
Yeah.
we're linked. We're linked.
We're in the field together. We're in the field.
You guys are obviously on the same mental intelligence wavelength right now. But I think it's an incredible privilege to feel the way we feel, like we can control the situation that we're in. Someone that's listening right now, let's say that they're not there yet. It's not as simple to just be like, well, are you where you want to be? Reflect on that. Like you said, there's a couple practices. Like what's step one for someone that might be like 5 years ago, Tej?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's first of all the intention behind it. So a funny thing happened. Like one of the coaches in the mastermind, and I asked this exact question or a very similar question. I asked him, I said, like, what's purpose, man? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm here in this program, and there's like, I'm trying to figure out what the hell I should do, right? Like, there's a bunch of different things. Should I just like go explore my passions? Like, what should I do? And he said, hey, like, I want you to like feel into something. I want you to feel, and there's an accolade at this company that I work at, and I used to work at the time, where like the highest accolade was called the top 300 people in the company. And I really pursued that the whole year. That's all I thought about, and everything that I wanted to do was revolved around this. He said, like, think back to that time and think back to how much effort you put into like getting that accolade, right? Like, what that and like what were the actions that you took to like get that completed or get to that point. It's like, now take that and then put the compass towards your purpose. Use the same kind of energy that you had towards getting to this accolade, towards uncovering your purpose, right? So first of all, I would say the first step is the intention behind finding it, right? Being present, like that being important to you, right? Like saying like, you know what? Like, I don't like the way that I live, right? Like, I don't like being unpresent to how I am in situations. I don't like just living a life that I'm like very robotic, and I wake up and I do the same things and I just go to sleep and I watch Netflix, and you know, like the whole thing that we know about, like, I don't like that, right? So the intention then is, okay, I got to change. So what are some of the things that I can do? And I think the world will start to open up. People will start to show up. And like, I wish I could just give a prescriptive, you know, silver bullet answer, but there is none, right? Because everyone's path is very individual, right? And like the coaches or the people or the book, or like it could be just that one thing is going to be different for everyone, but where it's going to come from or it's going to show up is your intention when you open your eyes and you're open to seeing it, right? Like when you're open to seeing it, things will just start to happen. And like, just, you know, just trust in that, right? Like some of these concepts, I might say them and you may be like, that's bullshit. Like, what are you talking about? But like, but it just if you have the intention, you'll be surprised how how the universe or life or, whatever you want to call it, it's surprising, man. Like I saw the craziest shit in my like journey, like think people showing up, like, it just, when you start to like listen and have that intention, things start to happen.
That's such a fascinating point. I mean, Derek and I were just talking about this because it all starts within your mind. And so when I hear intentions, it's like, it's what are your thoughts? And your thoughts translates into your words, and your words translate into your actions. And when you start becoming intentional about discovering yourself or finding your purpose, I don't think it's a coincidence that these opportunities or these type of people start to manifest itself like in your life. And it sounds like kind of your story is a great example of that. You were talking a lot about kind of like purpose when you were in this master class, and certainly that's one of the central themes of our podcast. And we always think this is kind of a heavy question, but we're going to ask it to you anyways. Based to where you are on your journey at this point, what is your purpose, Tej?
Yeah, and that is a heavy question. So I thought. Right. I thought this was a heavy question, and I was really caught up in it for a long time, man. And it was like to what I was saying earlier, for me personally, that became a trap too, because I was looking for that silver bullet answer to what my purpose was, because I thought it was this thing that I was going to get to and be like, I've got
and it's it, and I'm good, and I don't ever have to worry about this again. Like it's here.
Exactly. Yeah, it's here. Like I was looking for that thing, right? And that was a trap in itself, because there's no one thing, right? There never is going to be. And what I identified through a lot of my self-discovery, and like, part of this was, when my coach told me, hey, like put that much effort as you did the accolade, I really put that much effort, man. Like I actually left my job at one point. I sold everything, and this was like probably 6 months or a year into the program. I sold everything, and I traveled to Estonia, Tallinn, this country, for a program. And I did a bunch of different like spiritual centers, and I really was like, I want to like really go in to myself and really understand who I am. And like, if I was to like sum it up in a nutshell, man, for me personally, what purpose it is that know thyself and be thyself. And what I mean by that is, once you really, really get to know yourself, right? Like express that. So purpose is identified or expressed everywhere, right? So when I wake up and I, talk to my mother or my father or my family, my relationships, that's my purpose at the moment, right? Like, can I show up fully, and can I be like completely present to that situation with my family? And that's my purpose at the moment, because I have an opportunity there to share love and joy and positivity in that interaction, right? So then I show up to my work, right? And I'm doing something very similar, but if I show up in a purposeful way and really be myself, and I think at the core, we're all the same. What I mean by that is like, we're all looking for the same things, and we all want to express the same things, love, joy, positivity, all these higher emotions are truly who we are at the core nature. But then we have our personalities, obviously, right? We're all different, and we have our own little blueprint. And I do believe, we are the cosmic blueprint of our purpose, right? Like we are like, this is it. Like the Tej is the purpose. It channels manifest themselves when you're truly being yourself, right? So that happens through, like, for example, for me, is through the podcast, right? I thought that would be a great channel to share my purpose, which is to allow people and help people become truly who they are, right? Identify things about themselves and then express them, right? Like come from a place of intention, and like energetically, like energy doesn't lie, right? Your thoughts can confuse you. Your thoughts can, create doubts, but energy doesn't lie. Like you'll like the feelings you can't manipulate, right? They're just they just come up. So if you feel good about what you're doing, I think that is your purpose at the moment. And I think refining that happens, right? Like you're always, the way that I like to picture is kind of like a spiral, right? Like you're always going deeper into your purpose, and you're never going to get to a point where it's going to be, you've just found it. You're always getting closer to it. So the channels will change themselves. So what that might mean for me right now is the podcast and being completely present at my work, with my family, and everything that I do. And then also perhaps that leads into coaching in the future. I don't know what the channels might be in the future. But I go back to like, who am I becoming, and am I expressing myself from the highest place in myself?
Tej, can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
I mean, you've been
Absolutely.
like monopolizing this, man. Okay, like
So,
I'm
well,
curious too.
yeah, sorry. I was just gonna
Just
say, let's
kidding.
take a step back to just like that was beautiful, and like the presence that can be of just like being present in every moment. So I was just gonna take a time for all of us to just step back and be like, wow. But yeah, no, Derek, please go right ahead.
What I'm picking up here, and I resonate with it strongly, is like you're able to be present because you just trust that you're on the right journey. Like whatever Tej is doing right now will become what ultimately you're meant to go accomplish in life. So you mentioned the coaching thing might come up, but is there a moment for you where, like, how do you couple being present with planning?
Yeah.
Right, like, and
Yeah.
that's coming probably more from my heart as like an entrepreneur. Like,
Yeah.
I have a freaking, I can't tell you, probably 2 times a week I'm getting up from bed to like write down an idea. I actually wrote one down last night, funny enough. But like, how do you, like, I put a really strong emphasis on like, being present and like trusting the process and knowing who I am, that's just going to lead to the, the right stuff.
Yeah.
But I do find myself strategizing and planning and like making sure I'm on the right path. How do you marry that together?
Yeah. Yeah. So these are separate poles, you can say, or they're polarities, but they're one of the same, and it's what do you decide? What do you allow to come first, right? Like, are you planning first and then seeing how you feel about it? Or are you trusting and seeing, what is it that's being called out of you and then planning to make it happen, right? And you can call these poles, the feminine and masculine energy within us. You can call it the yin and yang, right? Because the yang is really the action and the planning and like getting shit done, right? And the yin is really the allowing and the surrendering and saying, okay, allow life to happen, right? And they're one and the same. And that's where I think people start to get conflicted, is that they think they're separate things. And you just gotta, like, in our world, in our especially the Western world, right? Like, we're very much programmed to just get shit done, right? Like, use our logical mind to allow things to happen, right? Like, it's all on you, and it is to a larger extent. But at the same time, we're not really, especially as men, we're not really programmed, or we don't really know how to tap into the yin in us, right? Like the feminine energy in us, which is really like, can I trust uncertainty? Can I trust like,
No.
yeah, it's like, and uncertainty is like the worst fear to the mind, because, right, like I face it every day.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
whenever there's a level of uncertainty, you're like, like, I need to figure this shit out, and I'll tell you guys, like, the most difficult situation for me when I left my work, right, and the act of leaving, a high paying job in SF to go buy a one-way ticket to Estonia, right, like to this remote country that borders Russia. There was so much uncertainty in that, right? But I never really knew, like, I didn't know how to trust that part of myself. I didn't know how to trust the universe. So I really had to go to that extreme, right, to experience what that was, and kind of almost like fall off a building and see, like, if I was being caught. And I was every time, like, the situations just like panned out where it was just beautiful and perfect, exactly the way that it should have been. So I had to, like, I don't think that needs to happen for everyone, but I needed to go to that deep extent to really feel into that energy. And to your point, then now, like, I've come to the point where then it becomes about integration, right? So can you listen to yourself? Can you be present? But at the same time, if you really have a breakthrough, or like something drops in and it really feels good, are you taking action? Because a takeaway or idea without action is just nothing, right? Like, it just comes and goes away. But if something stays persistent in my being, and it's like, I really need to act on this, and this has come up like 20, 30 times, and I'm continuing to ignore it, like, I need to take action on this, right? So that's where that other energy comes into play. So does that answer what you're asking there, Derek?
I think you went a little deeper too, which is good. Yeah, I mean, it's I think ultimately, just to recap, it's like, you've just got to trust yourself, and it actually resonates strongly with like the podcast that we do with Purpenthicity. Like, we've had countless conversations around like, what are we doing with, hey, where do we want to take this? And what it always centers back to is, let's just keep producing good content and see what happens. That's what it always comes back to every time we talk, which is probably like once a month on the strategy of Purpenthicity. It always comes back to, let's just keep putting out good stuff and see what happens from it. Yeah. Another interesting point you made, Tej, was like the see if you fall off a building and you get caught. You actually, I'm going to challenge a little bit, because you said like, oh, I don't know if anyone needs to do that, because I did that too. And I found that was like my gateway to like really learning me and believing in who I was when I started my first company. And I literally said the same thing. I was like, I just want to jump and see if like I grow wings, or like I want to jump and see if there's a net down there that's going to catch me. Like I'm not going to die from this. And it was like that like wake up call, that like sharp moment in time where it's like everything changed. And it took an extreme for me. So hopefully some people don't need that extreme. I needed to do it. I quit my job and I started coming in like $600 and I was like, I can do it. And I had a pregnant fiance and a son. So like, I definitely wouldn't recommend that, but resonates strongly.
That point. And then what I meant by that, I think to your point, Derek, and now that you say it in that way, I think you need that kind of jump to see how the universe can surprise you. But at the same time, the circumstance is going to be a little different for everyone, right? So like that jump off the building for me was leaving my job, flying to this country. And I could do that because, I didn't have a fiance or a son that I needed to like take with me. I could do that, right? So whatever that jumping off the building is for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like do that.
Yeah, don't replicate
jumping.
Yeah, don't just replicate. Like, hey, I gotta. Tej went on a trip.
We got husbands moving to Estonia right now. I'm sorry, Tej said to do it.
Well, exactly. It's so individualistic, but even the parallels in both of your unique stories in that way is that you both dived into the unknown. Right. Yeah. And possibility lives in the unknown. Like if we're going to continue, like everything that we know, like our comfort zone is what we already know. Right. And if we want something that we haven't had, typically we have to do something that we've never done. And Tej, to your point, that can be scary, particularly in more so like the Western world where everything, and I will say even particularly with men, is so analytical. Like, does this make sense? Does this align with my plan? And I think sometimes we lose sight into like what's in our hearts, or like what's that calling in us to say, this is actually what I want. So I think it's just, I think that's a fascinating example of, I mean, both of you have just jumping into it and seeing what was created, which was all this new mindset, this new discovery in yourself as a result of doing it.
Yeah, Austin, the one thing that I'd say in addition to that is like, it doesn't make me a permanent superhero at it. Like I'm still afraid to do things, right? Like there are still things that I present myself with to this day that I'm like, do I want to jump in there? And it gets harder with time. So like, if you've never done it, it's like, I think the best analogy would be like, do you dip your toe into the pool and see it's a little too cold and then you don't jump in? Or do you just jump the hell in and within 10 seconds, you're like, this is the best pool I've ever been in my life?
Yeah, I agree with that, Derek. And it's interesting because it consistently comes back, and it's the same in my journey too. Like I completely agree with that, where it's you take that, it's like to your example, jump in that pool once you've gotten out and you've dried up. That doesn't mean you're going to jump in again. You might want to.
Yeah, exactly. I love the way you just finished that up. Exactly. It's like, I did that. Like, do I want to do it again? Is this one? It actually makes you, I think more deeply the next time you jump in, because it's like, for me anyways, I get in my own, it's like, all right, cool. It worked once. Is it going to work again? Is simply jumping is that the secret recipe? Like I'm challenged with things like literally to this day of like, am I going to do that? Am I going to jump in? And then I've got to summon like that inner strength to challenge myself to be like, dude, do it. Just do it.
Well, it's funny because I think it touches like the notion where it's like there's a finish point where it's like, oh well, I'm at the place where I want to be from a personal transformation perspective. There's no more growing, when in actuality you're consistently iterating and growing upon that. And I think that even kind of leads to a next question, Tej, is like, what's next for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make a point and then I'll answer that. Just on that, what the image that came to mind is like the body of water continues to get bigger because you know yourself, and it gets more scarier. So like the pool becomes the lake and the lake becomes the ocean. I was like, that's a really good analogy.
That's a powerful metaphor.
Hell yeah, dude. Like go find your fucking ocean, dude.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, because you start to like, you're like, I conquered the pool. Now shit, there's the lake, and that's what
that's a really good metaphor. That's a perfect way to sum it up, because as I've gotten older and like acquired more like just personal relationships, my wife and kids, it's like a house, it's like it is a fucking ocean now to jump into. It's not a little pool. It's like I have a lot of stuff that I'm risking, like, so that's beautiful. I want to put that on a t-shirt. Find your fucking
Yeah.
ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just the image came to mind. But to your question, Austin, like I think it's that, right? Like finding my ocean. Like what's my next ocean is what's next for me, right? Like what I've and it's interesting because here's another trap is that once you get to a point, or at least I've found in my journey, getting to the point of self-discovery and spiritual discovery and personal growth, and you go through that, and sometimes your ego wants to put a flag on top of the mountain and say you've conquered it, right? And that's never the case. It never is. So for me, it's to remind myself that consistency matters, right? Like I always got to go back. I still have to do the things that got me to this point, and I've got to add on, right? I got to find that next lake, the next ocean. So that's kind of, that's a vague statement, but practically what that means is just like continuing to tap into what's next. So the podcast was the manifestation of that, right? Where I was saying, like, I have a message to share, I have a story to share, and a lot of people do, right? And the conversation we're having here today is so important. And I had, after my travels, I had so many people around me that were in a similar path that had forgotten there's so many people that are not in that journey, right? So like not leaving anyone behind, right? Like that's kind of like what's super important to me. And like, sharing this message and allowing people to just like tap in and say like, hey, like the conversation that these three men have had today, like, do I want to like maybe scratch the surface a little bit about myself? And like, even that's enough. If that initiation happens,
that
you just
seed.
like, yeah, that seed, or you like take one step and then everything else will start to like uncover itself. And I think that's really important for me. And what's next for me is continuing that path, right? Continuing the journey and not allow the ego to take over and say like, now I've arrived.
We need to help people find their puddles.
Yeah.
Puddles, the little baby pool, then the big pool. That's amazing. I guess two questions that kind of came into me as we're kind of wrapping this thing down. What do you do with this? I think you have this really unique vision of consistency. What do you do whenever you find yourself in a period where you get stuck? Because I think that's very common. Even the most driven, purposeful people in life's up and downs, you get stuck. So like, how would you attack that when you feel like you're kind of stuck or you're stagnant along your journey?
Like the word that comes up to me is like radical acceptance of your circumstances, right? And what I mean by that is like, we get stuck when we don't like what's happening, right? Or we think that we're stuck in some way, right? Then we're like, oh, like this isn't what I planned life to be like, right? So like radical acceptance in your situation while looking to change it, right? Like look for the solutions. And like, I've found myself many a times, like even after the trip, right? Like I took the trip and last year and I've gone through some changes. I'm in Indiana at the time with my family. I was living in San Diego. And there were times last year I was like, am I like in the right place? Like, should I be doing that? Like that always happens. And that's what I mean by radical acceptance is like, know that life is in ups and downs. You're never going to go up into like, again, the whole analogy about like putting a flag on top of the mountain. Now I've arrived. Now I'm just going to be happy, joyful, and peaceful. And I'm Buddha now,
That
like,
doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist. And that's again, the path of consistency is always reminding yourself. And point out I'll say around this is like, I've done this and I'm falling into this trap is like shaming yourself or like feeling really shitty about yourself, because we can be our worst critic, and like not falling into the trap of just like beating yourself up if you had a stretch of a month where you didn't do the things that you should have been doing. Like you didn't wake up in the morning and you didn't do your morning routine, and like what makes you a purposeful individual, like don't like if you don't do that for a stretch of a week or 2 weeks, just if it's still aligned, get back on it. If it's not, that's fine too. Like you're just living your life, and life is going to present you with circumstances and opportunities to go back and tap into being purposeful, right?
Hey,
So,
that is so beautiful, man. Like the story that I'd have for that is my wife introduced me to this thing called 75 Hard. If either of you have heard of it to this point, it's supposed to be like this radical 75-day long program where you work out twice a day, you go on a diet, you don't drink alcohol, and you read 10 pages of a book every day.
mm-hmm.
And we started it together. I quickly quit after 7 days. But like what you're saying is like, it's like this social conformity that everyone feels like they need to be in. And I think that's what makes like health trends so powerful, because it's like, oh, if I don't follow that, then I'm failing and I'm going to never be healthy. Where the way I look at 75 hard is like, oh, cool, man, that could give me some really good consistency in some of the shit that I care about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But like part of that 75 hard, like the part I didn't care about was like, I kind of enjoy a beverage every now and then. Like, I don't want to punish myself to go be on this like program, and I didn't feel wrong about it. It was like, no, I can do everything else in there. I don't need to do the 75 hard posts on Instagram every day. Like, I'm good, but it's like one of those things where like, some people probably do that, and when they fail it, they probably crash internally because they label themselves like failures. But it's like, learn from like what you've picked up from that and go implement one of those new things and be happy and satisfied with your personal growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, Austin, real quick, is that one thing you said was like, that didn't feel wrong to me. And I think that's like such an important point, is just check in with yourself, right? Like, whatever it is that you're doing, if it like feels right to you and like you're happy with it, then whatever, like do that thing. Whatever
you're in the right place, my man.
Yeah, you're in the right place. Because like, again, what I said earlier was like, you can like confuse and you can like sell yourself by your thoughts. Like, if you've done something that you don't feel good about, like you can sell yourself and you can find an excuse and say like, whatever. But like the feelings don't lie in that way. Emotions don't lie in that way. So I just wanted to highlight that, because it's such an important point to just come back and be like, yeah.
I intentionally quit it with that in mind. Like, I didn't fall off the wagon. I was like, oh, I had a drink, it's ruined. Yeah. Like, I looked at my wife and I was like, listen, I'm like 8 days in and I just don't like this. Like, I don't like the idea of like, it almost made me start feeling like alcohol was like a punt, like, oh, you're a bad person. It's like, I don't want to have that relationship with like my casual beverage that I want to have. So I was like, I'm going to stop. I'm going to reconstruct this now, since I've fallen off the wagon pretty good. but that's another conversation.
It sounds like me just going back to like, know thyself and be thyself, kind of like what you said earlier. And then even touching into like the radical acceptance, like it's okay. And even like this notion of failure is like a construct that's been like taught to us, where it can be so individual. You don't have to follow every single detail of a plan for it to be successful. It's almost like defining what your own level of success is and pivoting based off of what feels right for you. So I just found like the beautiful interweaving of a lot of things that you've kind of shared today, Tej, and even just that example.
Yeah.
And I'll say, as we're looking to close out here, you've described probably a couple of superpowers within yourself, or like showing like the power of your individual authenticity during our discussion today. But what would you say is your superpower, or like the essence of who you are that you believe is, assisted you in this revelation and this clear identification of being yourself and trying to promote that within other people?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I would say like tune in to yourself. And like, for me personally, like when I've followed my path, it's been this internal voice, right? Like beyond noise, like something telling me like, hey, continue on the path, or continue doing this. So it's, what I described earlier was the higher intellect, or the awareness in you, that inkling to continue, right? To continue growing. I think that is my superpower, because I'm never settled, right? Like whenever I feel comfortable or settled, there's something in me that's saying, no, this is not enough. Like you're continue walking, because that's why we're here on this planet, right? Like I hope, like what I wish for myself is like when I'm 80, I'm still like having conversations like this, like I'm still I'm on my rocking chair and I'm like talking to my grandkids about like, something that I'm like learning, so like that is I would say my superpower. And then within that, like everything else starts to come. Like when I'm learning, I can acquire, I think it's a grand superpower, right? Because you can acquire more superpowers through learning more things, right? So that's what comes up for me.
That's beautiful. It almost sounds like just being able to just like block outside noise and hear that little voice within inside yourself and be super present to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Cool.
That's amazing. I think all the three of us need to join like a book club or something. So yeah, I mean, Tej, we can't thank you enough for your time. I mean, this was stellar. You have just a tremendous story. I continue to be in awe of you, man, and like the bravery that you have and exploration and just like the hunger that you have and like continuing to like to center yourself is honestly, it's really inspiring. So thank you so much for giving us part of your time today and sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. This was amazing to share it. Like, you know, part of me starting the podcast was to share my story in correlation with have other people on. And I've always known like that's where I like light up, you know. So thanks for giving me the platform to like go and like actually share my story fully, you know, like at the podcast, you're always pulling that out of other people.
For sure.
So it's fun to be on the other side and just kind of share the elements.
For sure. And hey, Tej, if people wanted to contact you after this, what would be the best way for them to engage or connect with you?
Yeah. So, you know, Instagram, Growth Lab Podcast is a great way. I have, you know, my personal Instagram, also LinkedIn. Those two channels I'm mostly active on. As far as the, like, if you're going to have like a little segment in the end, perhaps just mention that, like Growth Lab Podcast on Instagram. I'll send you the handle, and then also I'll send you my personal handle on LinkedIn also. Those are like the two easy ones that I use right now.
Cool. That's perfect.